I need to give you a very, very quick, and I promise I'll keep it very brief, overview of what we do, because that'll explain why we're doing this talk, okay? It's not so much to try to sell you on anything. The idea is really you need to understand what we're all about, because that'll inform why we're going through this analysis. We'll talk a little bit about migrations that we do. I think it'll tie nicely to what we heard yesterday from OpenSCG. The Postgres support experiences that we have, so what do we do in our call center? And again, not so much the actual work, but more like why are customers calling us and what are the types of questions that they're asking. We do something called a health check, which means we look at our customers' Postgres installations. We do quite a number of those projects. And again, we went through a systematic analysis here to see, okay, so what are we seeing? What is happening? What kind of questions do people have? Where are the problems, right? Because the reason really we're doing this is, on the one side, yes, we would like to share some metrics with the community because we believe some of the stuff that we're seeing could be important input on where Postgres needs to go to be even more successful. That's the first thing. The second thing is, it's a little selfish, we want to make sure that we can service our customers better. The last thing is, because we're a product company, we want to make sure that our product takes care proactively of the problems. So that basically the problem occurs maybe once or twice, but then hopefully is being taken care of by the next generation of the product and never occurs again. And I'm not talking about bugs, I'm talking about usability problems, how-to problems, things where Postgres is quite different from databases that folks may have experienced in a prior life, okay? So really the focus of what we're trying to do here is to understand where our customers have problems with Postgres and what can we do about it to make their experience with Postgres better, and that way make Postgres even more applicable for people who have not been dyed-in-the-wool Postgres users for years. So, as I said, a wee bit, just quick, about what we do, okay? Because it's important to understand why we're doing this. We're a Postgres company. All we do ties to Postgres, okay? Now, we do three things with Postgres. One is we work with customers who use PostgreSQL Community Edition. Lots of our customers do that. We're very happy. We love those customers, just like the other customers that use our proprietary distribution of Postgres. Some customers come to us and say, hey, we want more than what we're getting from the standard Community Edition. We need better tooling, we need better security, and we need, big for us, Oracle compatibility. Okay? So we've added some stuff around Postgres to address those requirements. That's our proprietary distribution. And then relatively new, about a year and a half old, is Postgres Plus Cloud Database, which runs at Amazon and provides PostgreSQL and Postgres Plus at Amazon in a cloud elastic type of setup, very much like RDS, with some, we believe, additional features. So really, the reason we're doing this is because customers are asking us questions about manageability, security, high availability, and performance, okay? But that does not take anything away from the fact that all of our work, everything that we do, is wrapped around Postgres. So the way we look at it is, we got a great database with Postgres, right? And I think, you know, Bruce, the fact that he is still with us.
8 years in. In fact, Monday was my 8th year.
8th year. All right, great. So, you know, we have a sizable investment in the community, right? And we don't want to, again, not take anything away from that. So we have people like Dave and Bruce and Robert Haas and Noah and Kevin, etc., all working on contributing on this side. But our customers have told us, hey, we want a little bit more. So that's where we're adding in, okay? So it also gives us a certain ability to address customer-specific needs in a different type of roadmap than what we get with the community, okay? We obviously influence the community roadmap, but sometimes, you know, there's things where customers say, hey, we want it, and we want it now, so then we work with them to get it, okay? So that's basically what we do when we add certain enterprise features to it, okay? So that context set about our company. let me talk a little bit about the first of the three subjects, the migrations. Migrations, we heard yesterday Translatus talk about SQL Server. We're seeing most of the interest coming from for Oracle migrations, right? Sort of off the cuff, I would say it's probably 60% of the interest that we get is for Oracle, followed by SQL Server now that they've jacked up their prices, then followed by DB2 and some MySQL. Okay? Now, where are the obstacles that we're seeing? There's certain things that we just do not have in Postgres today that are getting in the way, such as autonomous transaction pragma, the merge statement. Okay, that is one thing. That's sort of like one dimension where we're running into obstacles, right? I mean, there's workarounds for these things, but again, think about it. We're a product company. Customers want to use our product just like that and not get a tremendous amount of services to figure it out. So these are situations where we bump into a bit of an obstacle because the customer will take it and say, well, but this doesn't work, right? And we know that not everything works, but most of the things work. Then obviously scalability, vertical scalability, and then rack-like scalability, something that customers are asking for quite a bit and is getting in the way of using the true potential that we think that Postgres has from a capabilities perspective today. There are some, we have a compatibility layer that we worked on for quite a few releases, but there are still some things every once in a while that are missing in there. But much more important for me is these first two where, that is really getting in the way because customers say, oh yeah, I don't want to pay for Oracle, but I love rack. Okay, so give me something like it. Okay, and that is becoming an obstacle again and again, or in the scalability where they say, and sometimes it's because Oracle injected it into the RFP, you got to prove that you can scale up to 128 cores, right? And that does get in the way. So again, we got a fantastic database, it can do a whole lot of stuff, but these are the roadblocks that we're bumping into, okay? Where are we really successful with migrations? Well, there's a simple trick, okay? If somebody wants to migrate, and you can ask them, are you using an object relational framework such as Hibernate? The migration is going to be very easy, right? Because that usually means that they don't use packages, they don't use PSQL, right? They don't use
PLSQL.
PLSQL, sorry. So there's not a whole lot of stuff happening in the database except for storage. So that's a really strong indicator for us that, okay, this looks like a really good candidate, okay? In our experience, now keep in mind that we got this Oracle compatibility thing. 70% of the cases that we run into, Postgres can handle the workload really, really well. Okay? So it's really become something that works quite well, can be done quite effectively, and I think we would be even more successful if we can take care of these issues here in Postgres. Okay? So that's our first observation, where we have certain roadblocks when we do migrations. And we do quite a few, and frankly, large customers are now coming out of the woodworks and asking for assessments for hundreds of schemas. Okay, so this is really, really becoming a very, very hot topic, and it's only happening lately. That is those volumes, right? Before it was a little bit like the sniff test, and now customers are coming, hey, saying, I got this large volume, can you tell me, would this work? What happens if we try to do this with Postgres? Okay, so support. Support, we have again, just for the wee bit of background, we have a dedicated support operation in Pune in India. There we have continuously butts and seats. So we get quite a few tickets, and we have a good ticket management system. So what we thought we would do is really try to understand what our customers calling about and why. Because usually when a customer calls support, it's a sign that, they're frustrated, something is not working, they didn't understand something, they need help. And the less often they call, the more likely it is that they're happy and that they actually understand how to use the product, right? What we're seeing is that we have more people coming in from the Oracle world, from the SQL Server world, right? And just as Scott from Translators was saying yesterday, if you come from a SQL Server world, you're used to a GUI, right? And they don't get it, right? So where are the problems? And what do we need to do to make it easier for them? That's really what we're trying to do here. Understand where they run into roadblocks, okay? And the other part that we're seeing is Postgres is moving from, I would say, from a departmental solution many years ago to now something that is enterprise mission critical. Which also means that when customers call us, it's no longer oh, I got my little development system here with 15 users and how do I do this? It is, oh my God, it's down, it's not working. Oh my God, you gotta help me, right? So the urgency and the complexity has gone up tremendously, right? So not only do we have a different type of user, it's a different type of problem. And when they call, they know a lot more about the product than they knew years ago. So the expectation and the requirements that we have also changed. And we want to understand what do we need to do there to, as I said, make Postgres even more successful. Partly it is, okay, we want to have target white papers, so we need to understand where's the target, not just from a features and functions perspective of the engineer, but what is the target, what is the obstacle for that gets in the way of further Postgres adoption. That's what we're looking for, right? How can we then obviously target the support team, right? So that they become more knowledgeable, that they have the answer readily available, right? But then, proactive training for the users. So as we see users go through the life cycle of Postgres adoption, what can we do for them? I mean, as you'll see in a minute, there are problems that they have early on in the life cycle, or problems that they will run into when they go into operating in production that they are not aware of when they're in the proof of concept phase. So, but as we see them move into those phases, what can we do for them at every stage so that they're ready to take the next one successfully and not call us with sometimes how-to questions, product awareness questions, or disasters that they created, right? Okay, so and then the last one obviously here is, we're engineers, I'm an engineer, right? So I love to do nifty stuff in the product. But how do we balance the new nifty stuff with the things that frustrate our customers, right? Where we're not just looking forward, but we're sort of also making sure that the usability of the product is what meets our customers' needs, especially as the profile of the customer is changing. Just a little bit here, what we're seeing. Today we have about 2,500 customers. We get thousands of calls every year. So the analysis that I'm going to use here is based on real data. It's not just 20 tickets that we looked at. It's really, we looked over a period of 18 months, did a lot of sampling. We normalized for seasonality, for things that happen with the new product introduction, with the introduction of new versions, etc. Right? But what you see in this curve here, our number of contracts has gone up, but our number of tickets has not. But the severity of our tickets has gone up, right? The types of problems and the amount of energy that we need to put into them has gone up, right? Which has been a real frustration because I also run services and I'm trying to explain to the CFO that I need more money. And the CFO says, no, you just got just as much work now as you had before, right? And I try to explain to her, no, life has become much more complicated. And she says, sure. Okay, so let me work you for the first interesting thing that we found is, so we have this commercial, our proprietary distribution of Postgres, right, that we call Postgres plus Advanced Server. And then we support PostgreSQL, and a significant number of our customers are on the standard platform. It's on the community platform. It's, I would say, about 30–35%, okay? Now what's really interesting at first sight here is that you see that when they go on our commercial distribution, or our proprietary distribution, then by far the majority is also on a proprietary or commercially managed operating system. But what's interesting is when they go into the community edition, there's still a very significant percentage, about a third, that that are on a commercially managed platform. But what's really interesting is, by far the majority pay for Postgres support, but they don't pay for operating system support. Okay, which we find really interesting, and we're trying to figure out, okay, so what does that tell us? And I think it tells us that there is still an awareness out there that you need to know more about this. This is not as easy to support, as easy to operate, so they use us sort of like a, I don't know, a safety blanket or insurance, but they don't feel they need that on the basic operating system. Now, when do customers call us? Okay, so we look at, and a lot of this is new. When we recorded these tickets, okay, over the last 18 months, we didn't have these classifications. As we were looking at our new roadmap, I went back to my support manager and said, dear friend, what I want you to do is take 18 months worth of tickets and tell me what they really mean. Please, because I don't just need you to do a good job, I need you to tell me what needs to be in the product. What do we need to do to make your tickets go away? Okay? Because the happiest customer is the customer who doesn't call. Right? Okay, that's really important, right? Because for a support center manager, the more people he has, the happier he is. Well, I'm happier if he doesn't need that many people, right? So we looked at this, and a lot of this is sort of retroactive. So I had that poor fellow go through a year and a half worth of tickets. It took him a while, and he had to after the fact go through everything. But going forward, we're applying these classifications to our tickets because we need to know better why our customers are calling and what are we doing to make the problems go away. Not just solve the problem faster. I want the problem to go away. Okay. So they call us with proof of concept. They call us with in the development phase. They call us when they're getting ready to deploy, and then by far, the majority is doing what we call the maintenance phase. So they all are in production. That's by far when we get the majority of calls. Okay? Which I also find interesting, but as we dig into it, we'll understand, we actually think we understand now why they're calling then and what can we do to reduce the number of calls there. Because in many other situations, I would have expected that POC development and deployment would be the majority of calls, and after that, it sort of flattens out. Now, also, what skews this a little bit is that somebody can be for years in this phase and for a relatively short time in that phase. Okay? So, why are customers calling? All right, so as we look at these phases here, you can see that, that during proof of concept phase, they call a lot with how-to questions. Okay, and how-to is, how do I set up a table space? How do I do, and I got a couple of examples that I wrote up, like how do I set up pooling? Okay, so there's questions like how do I set up failover? Okay, or they call with questions like which we classify as product understanding. So when I set this wall parameter in the config file, how quickly is that going to impact things? Do I have to restart? Do I have to reload? What, how quickly is that going to impact stuff? So there's a lot of questions about understanding the product, okay? But obviously very, very few questions about corruption, and understandably very little about tuning. And as we go forward here, right, the mix is changing quite a bit, okay? But what's really interesting for us is we got a lot of product awareness and a lot of how-to questions, okay, all the way through the mix. So, trying to break this out even further, right? So now we're saying, okay, so this is the classification that we use to understand our tickets even more. So people call during a certain phase, right? And they call about the connectors, the database, the replication, or what we call tools and utilities. Okay, so where are the questions? Where do customers have problems? Well, it turns out here, 36% are all related to how-to questions, awareness questions happening during deployments and the maintenance phase. And then a little bit about tuning. Okay, which is for us is really interesting, because now that we're at that stage, right? Now I can go back and say, like right now we have when I inherited this job, we had a big knowledge base. We had 1,000 articles, right? And we would publish a couple of articles every month and stuff, and we would give everybody $20 when they published an article, and so it was good. Now we know that the articles have to be about this, and that. Don't give me articles about, how to set up utilities or something. Because, yeah, they may be nice, but that's not where customers have the problem, and that's not where we have the problem, okay? So what we now need to do is we need to really figure out what do we do here. So, going further in, these are sort of the top questions, not in rank order, but these are the top questions that we're getting, okay? And it's really the number of questions that make up the volume of calls is not very large, okay? It's not like we had a multitude of 1,000 different topics in there. There's actually quite a few topics, okay? So, and that's
yeah,
so now we're driving this further, right? I mean, this is all still work in progress because this new classification is now being implemented. As I said, everything that I showed you up to now was sort of retroactive. Now we're going to put this in, and we're going to tie our knowledge base articles, our dialogues, all to this, right? To further understand what can we do here, okay? And I know I should have said that before. Not sure. Does the conference make the presentations available? Is there a central mechanism?
Yeah,
Okay.
you upload them when you're done, and
Yeah.
then
Okay.
people can see.
So you don't need to take a lot of notes. So you'll get that. You'll get the deck. Okay. So those were sort of what we're doing in looking at our tickets, right? Then we have this other thing that we call an architectural health check. And what we do in there is, we do a top-to-bottom review of a customer's Postgres or Postgres Plus installation. It's a project that takes 3 to 5 days. Many of you know Tom Brown. He's the master coordinator of all of our architectural health checks. So it's a highly standardized process with automated scripts running, a report coming out, and recommendations being developed. What we do in there is we look at things like security, performance, backup, replication, maintenance, and how ready are they to do an upgrade, okay? Because we believe those are, from our experience, the areas where customers need to be solid in order to have a good experience with Postgres, right? So what Tom did is he took 20 AHCs that we did in 2013 and analyzed those, again, to come up with a bit of an understanding for where do customers have problems. Because again, it'll tell us where we need to improve our product, and as I said before, we have the ability to be a bit more, let's say, flexible there because we have some of our own tooling wrapped around Postgres. So we can drive some changes in that tooling while our community team works with the community to hopefully also achieve the same things in the community edition. All right, so first thing that we do is, there's obviously all the parameters in the conf file. So we said, all right, so how often do they need to be adjusted? Okay, where do people really have the problem? Okay, so, and it turns out in 95% of the cases, the effective cache size and then the shared buffers is where the majority of the problem is. And the list obviously is a lot longer, right? So it's about this long. These are the top, I think, 25. Okay? So and again, if you look at it here, right, we had the presentation, was it yesterday, from Greg Smith, right? Who talked about, how to manage the config file, right? Here we're looking at, okay, so where are the other problems in the config file? Not just how can you structure it and how can you make sure that you have a shared config file across multiple systems, right? But where do people have the problems? And you remember from his talk yesterday where he warned again and again, do not copy what I have on my screen, right? These are just examples. Well, we're seeing so many cases where people just take the standard parameters and run. And then they need more memory, but it still doesn't work. They need bigger disks, but it still doesn't work. And the only thing that happened is that they're not flushing the buffers often enough, that the memory setting is not right, that we're just struggling right now with a customer who has a system with 900 concurrent connections, and he wants to go to 50 times that load and wants to know seriously if he can do 45,000 concurrent connections. It takes some explaining that, that's not how it works here. Yes, in Oracle maybe, but here you got to change the architecture a little bit, and you have to understand how much memory you're going to allocate to the connections and the admin connections, etc. Right? The blue is what we found in the analysis. The red is what people like Robert Haas, and I think you also chimed in, and Tom Brown told me, this is where they think that most of the attention should be. So, and guys like Robert and Bruce and Tom come in sometimes when we have a real problem. Most of our analysis is done with service consultants, and only every once in a while we run into a real problem. And I guess so from their perspective, they, for example, say it's really important that you get the log line prefix and other things fixed, right? Because without that, you're screwed when you have a real problem. Right, so they look at it a little bit differently, whereas these parameters here are like what we see in real life experience. Okay? So our challenge is now, how are we going to work with, let's say, the PEM team, right, who develops the management tool, to make sure that the management tool provides the right advice to users to adjust these parameters correctly, because if you read the literature, it's quite algorithmic for most of it, right? Of how you adjust what, and you can get some pretty good advice. Okay? So that's really what we get out of an analysis like this. We now have a better understanding for where more of the stumbling blocks are. And somebody who's in services may say, but you guys are crazy. Aren't you making money off this? No, our purpose is, services for us is there to make sure that the customer gets the most value out of Postgres, right? So we're, as I said, we're a product company, and we're trying to make the product better, and services sort of like an adjunct to that, okay? Which again is a bit different if you're, my background is services, so I had to learn that the hard way, that, product comes first and services comes afterwards. And here we're really looking at how can we potentially minimize services or focus services on the really high value stuff, right? And not on the basic stuff, right? How can we really do an upgrade that only takes 10 minutes of downtime in every situation, stuff like that. It's not just the database parameters, there's also kernel parameters, right? And here again, in 70% of the cases, the dirty background ratio, and so basically the buffer flush settings had to be adjusted. Okay, which again, to anybody working in the space, well, probably is not a surprise. But if you use the default settings, right, what is it, 10 and 20, then you get a lot of spiky behavior, and we don't want that, right? So I think our recommendation standard is 1 and 2 versus 10 and 20. So, but again, people don't get it. It's written up, but it's not implemented in reality. Okay. Something that we found interesting. You probably can't read this, but out of all the cases that we had, only a minority of customers came to us and wanted to do a health check for our proprietary distribution. The majority wanted it for the community edition. That may be a strong indication that our current tooling that we have in our proprietary distribution already addresses many of the problems. And I wish Dave was here, Dave Page, who drives that development, because I think there's a strong indication there that tool already addresses quite a few of those problems, but is not deployed enough in the open source space.
What would that tool be?
At PEM, Postgres Enterprise Manager. So it's built on top of PGAdmin, and uses a lot of, advises a lot of how to set parameters and find deadlocks and stuff like that.
Yeah, I mean, it will check your server and make recommendations of changing, config parameters.
Now this is before people did the health check, okay? And it's shocking.
Well,
it's shocking, okay? Because the backup approach, 43% of the people who asked us to do a health check had no backup or were not able to do, under any circumstances, point-in-time recovery. Okay? And that is something, I mean, I don't know if this is a representative sample or, well, probably keep in mind that they call us for a health check when they know that they're in trouble. So it's probably at the bad end of the spectrum, right? But this is really, really bad, okay? And I think, personally, I believe that the whole backup aspect of Postgres is a real weakness right now. It is too complicated, too convoluted, too hard to do, okay? And then on standby, similar, okay? 18% had no standby, or what we call a cold standby. So there was a server somewhere set up to collect logs, but it would have taken hours or days sometimes to bring it up again, okay? So these are some major things that we believe need to be, they need to go away. It can happen by making the product simpler and better. It can happen through better education. It can happen through, you know, I guess generally more awareness in the user community.
Marc, can you explain a little more on that slide? You said the text is before the architectural health check?
This before, yes.
And then after is what the
Yeah,
implementation?
and after, so basically, we don't let anybody, I mean, we can't make changes to the systems, but we are certainly not going to recommend to anybody not to have a backup, right? So, I mean, our standard recommendation is you got to have the right mix between logical backup, physical backup, and point-in-time recovery capabilities. And we also strongly recommend that there needs to be at least an asynchronous replica set up off-site, okay? Because anything else is just a disaster waiting to happen in our mind, okay? And then the parameters then is, okay, how often do you do which backup? How long is it going to take you to do a point-in-time recovery? Those things. Okay, that's really where it depends on the application. But basically, I mean, there's a certain amount of diligence that is absolutely required. It's just when we walk in, this is what we found. There's another set of interesting maintenance tasks, and I guess this one here should have been really highlighted in yellow or red or something. If you look at it, and my background is not Postgres. I come from SQL Server and Oracle, okay? And what's interesting is almost half, if not, 43% of the tasks on here is somebody who comes from Oracle or SQL Server are totally unknown concepts. They don't exist, right? And I think it is still, even though bloat and fighting bloat and vacuum has become much better, it is still an enormous problem out there, okay? And that, I mean, the fact that 43% had this problem out there is, and it is also in our calls, it's a recurring issue. It's a recurring problem, it happens in all kinds of situations. And what's important, however, I think is, this will probably keep on growing the more people we have coming into the Postgres user community that are not dyed-in-the-wool Postgres people, okay? Because they will not understand that vacuum must run. They will turn vacuum off to get an additional 2 to 3% of performance for a couple days.
And then forget.
Okay? We have one customer right now who frantically, every weekend, manually vacuums tables. They have a whole team doing that manually because they're convinced that they need every last drop of performance, okay? And they do not understand that vacuum, full vacuum, analyze are all three different things doing three different things. And that is, in my view, a real problem, okay? Because as long as people keep on falling on their face because of something that to a Postgres, to somebody who understands Postgres is quite obvious, but for somebody who's new to Postgres is totally unknown, that is going to remain a problem. So, some observations that we had from our architectural health checks. I said before that Windows was quite prevalent, okay? But that was just, we don't really see our install base, right? All we see is our tickets, right? So we assume, and the architectural health checks, however, we go on site, we see the production installation. And there we see about 10% Windows installation. And we think that is about right what we see in our true customer base. We probably get more more calls and tickets from the Windows, from Windows installations than reflects the true install base, because Windows tends to be used during a development and proof of concept phase. Okay, so we believe that the install base is lower than what we showed in the initial ticket analysis, that it is somewhere, maybe north of 10%. And I'd be really interested if somebody has a different perspective on that or so, but we see that the Postgres tends to be deployed on Linux operating systems. Does anybody see anything different, or? At least that's where we're also seeing the best performance, and maybe because we got so many Red Hat people in the company, that's where we're sort of focused on that. Who knows? Then a big problem that we're having now, we saw it in the tickets, and we have significant issues with customer situations, is the disconnect between the DBA and the storage setup. Many DBAs do not know how the storage is set up. And because we know that tuning for the right storage is really important, right? And it can really screw you up, that is a real problem. I don't know yet what we're going to do about it, but somehow we need to make sure that as part of the education, as part of how you set up a project, right? It's not just the DBA, there needs to be a connection to whoever manages the storage. Operating system adjustments are also a big problem, as I said before. 30 background ratio is a real problem. But again, when we set up projects, we need to make sure that the people who set up the machines and the storage are part of the project. It's not just an application running on a system, and the system can't be just tuned generically, right? And again, it's something that we need to drive back into our projects and into our training to make sure that customers understand that. And here we're working on figuring this out, how we can be more prescriptive in this space. And I know Bruce and Craig here has been all over me to come up with definite recommendations. What should we tell customers? What works, what doesn't work? What are the right parameter settings, etc. Because it is absolutely crucial, and it tends to screw up quite a few projects. Okay, so in summary here, the reason we did this is we want to understand where our users are running into roadblocks, and what can we do about it? What can we do about it so we can better pinpoint problem trends, see them come earlier, and drive, obviously, our knowledge-based development, right? And knowledge-based really also means making stuff available to the community, but also working with folks like Brooks to have the right seminars, the right presentations to make sure that problems just don't occur, okay? Yes, on the one side, we want to get better at solving problems, but what equally as important for us is to make sure that the problem just goes away. Okay, and then this will drive our product development going forward, influence certainly how we balance between new features and addressing the issues that cause us and our customers problems.